11. Do what?
Like the internet just seems slow, like on all networks.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, people are shopping.
I hadn't noticed it. Are they still shopping, you think?
Yeah, that's how Cyber Monday deals. I got flea medicine for only 50, or 2 things flea medicine for only like $40, and it would have been 150.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great deal. Did you buy your robot vacuum cleaner? This is the greatest time to buy those. I need a new one. I didn't. Mine is telling me when I'm done. I want to start with section 11.1, working with data files. Now, when we're working with data files, or I kind of think of them as text files, because that's usually the file type that we would have in a lot of places. We saw that we have to open them. So if you look down in that first section, you'll see all the syntax here that we can use to open and close a file when we're working with Python. Now, what's interesting is the R and the W. So right here in this first example, they say you can use the syntax open, and then with the parentheses, you're going to supply your file name as a parameter, and then a comma, and you're going to specify the access mode. So the R means you're just going to read the data in the file. The W means you're going to update or write to the file. And then if we are ready to close our file, we're going to use that close statement. So let's go on to the next thing and see if they have some practice for us. Okay, this is some good old command prompt training. When you're working with files in Windows, I already mentioned how we have the file name, a dot, and then the file type. That's a full file name. However, that doesn't tell you where that file is on our hard drive or your solid state drive. For that, you need the path information to go along with the file. So look at these here. Notice this first one. Are those forward slashes or backslashes?
Forward.
Forward, are you sure?
Those top ones?
How can you tell?
Yeah, because they're
So,
leaning forward.
Leaning forward. And then here we have backslashes, leaning back. So which of these would be a Windows path?
The first one.
Which of these would be a Windows path? The second one, right? Because this first one would be a Linux or a Mac. Linux and Macs use forward slashes. Windows uses backslashes. Okay, so notice the difference. And the C colon for the drive letter. So we could leave that out. All right, so when we're using those path separators, we have to be really, really careful, because it can be really easy to accidentally get a forward slash instead of a backslash. And in some languages, that'll actually work. Windows will go ahead and take it and be fine. I get it. I know what you want to do here. But remember that if we're using a full path name, we're going to be starting with a backslash or a drive letter, ending with our file name. If I just put hello.txt, that's a relative path. That means relative to where you are right now, what folder you're in, I'm going to try to find that file name. Now that's important, because when we're opening files and working with files, sometimes these path specifications can cause us a little trouble. They have a nice graphic here where they talk about these different files. Data1.txt, if I look at that file, it is within the My Project folder. The My Project folder is within the All Projects folder. The All Projects folder is within the My Files folder. So notice how I can work my way back to get that folder ownership information for the different files. They have some nice examples down here to show you some of those different file paths. But in a couple of places, they use some special characters, like 2 dots. 2 dots refers to the parent folder. So if I'm looking at the My Data folder, what's the parent folder? All projects. And then this one down here,
So is the My Files considered a parent as well? Or is that a parent to the all projects?
it's a parent to the all projects.
Okay.
So a good question. Each one only has one parent, and it's the
Right.
one directly above them.
Is there such a thing as like the grandparent?
Right, so this one right here would refer to the grandparent.
Okay.
If they're doing dot, dot, slash, dot, dot.
Okay.
And so we could keep going, working our way back as much as we wanted to. All right, so this is why when you're doing websites, you should always use a path name that starts with a single dot. What's a single dot mean? If two dots means parent, the single dot means the current folder. And so if I'm working with a website, I always want those relative paths, that dot, to say, based on the current folder, go find mystart.html. And then you're going to be, if I put C:\/ my data / my website / start.html, nobody's going to be able to find that web page because they don't have a C:\/ folder that's named exactly the same as mine. So we want it to be relative to what theirs is named. So they have some additional great syntax here for how to use open and all sorts of different ways. Let's continue and try a practice one. Here's a practice. We have this text file, QB data. This is all these quarterbacks. So for all these quarterbacks, it's good for us this time of year, right? For all these quarterbacks, we have information about, oh, let's see. Right up here tells us what all the different fields are.
We've Brett Favre.
Everybody. So we have first name, last name, position, which they're all quarterbacks, so they should all be QB. Then we have their team. Notice they're not all perfectly lined up here. Then how many completions, attempts, yards, touchdowns, interceptions, completion percent, and their final rating. So we have this data file. In our program here on Runestone Academy, we're just going to be able to read this file like it's in our file system. Let's try it. Here they've got some code where they open it and close it. Well, I think it would be better if we copied this data, don't you? Let's select it. Click up here in the QB data area and Control A. Oops, that won't work. Select all of this data. Okay, let's copy it. Now I want to open Notepad and paste it.
Regular notepad, right?
Yeah, regular Notepad will be fine. Now when you paste it, it should look just exactly the same. It shouldn't reformat anything or do anything weird like that. Now I'd like to save this, and I'd like to save it in a folder in your 120 folder. So I'm going to say File, Save, and I'm going to go to my 120 class folder. And then I want to create a new folder. So before I click Save, I'm going to choose New Folder up here. And I'm going to name this folder Text File. So just like we had our glitch image folder, I want to create a text file folder to hold this information for reading a text file. Now I'm going to double click to go into that folder, and now I'll finally give my file a name. I'm just going to call it QB data, and I'm going to let the system put the .txt extension on it. There, do you need any help? Got a folder made? Got it saved? Save it. And I don't need that file anymore, so I'm going to close Notepad. Now I'd like to create a Python file with this open and close statement in it. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to close out of this War Game from working on it the other day and anything else I have open. And I'm going to create a new file. Now I want to save it. And I want to save it into my same text file folder. And I'm going to name this read QB data. And then I want to save it as a Python file. Uh-huh. Now the main thing for us is to make it in the same folder so we don't have to worry about all that path specification. So I'm going to put a comment or two here. Script read QB data. And this we're going to do from Runestone. Don't put my name. Okay, my purpose is going to be to read a sequential file. Now, the first thing I want to do, according to these Runestone experts, is say file ref equal open. And then my file is going to be qbdata.txt. And I want to open it for reading. So they use that same R. Now, just like they did, we're just going to close. Oops, we need file reference. That close.
Or like in case anyone can't get on their Runestone, I put the QB data on Discord and
Oh, thank you.
class programs.
Class programs, QB data. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so notice here what we have going on. First of all, this file ref is going to be the name we're giving this file association in our program. We're calling it file ref. So file ref now means this open QB data file. And then we're going to close our file ref. So let's run this and see if it'll work. Why do we want to do this with just these two statements? Well, getting to our file and opening it and closing it is going to be the source of the majority of our problems if we're working with data like this. So I'm just going to try to run it. Says it ran, so I guess there's no problem. Find my messages here that say that. Oh, look, I did not get that right. I've got an error. No such file or directory. How about you? Do you have an error? You got yours. Yours is working.
I got a no such file.
No such file. So I'm going to look at my folder. What I do wrong. I know what I did wrong.
I don't know what I.
Let's check. Let's go in File Explorer and go to our 120 folder. And in our 120 folder, let's see if we've got our text file stuff. Mine looks right. It's named qbdata.txt. That'll look good.
We need that last
I'm gonna check my view. And I'm looking at my extension, so there shouldn't be anything wrong there.
You don't have text file. Or do you need the parent, which is the text file folder?
Nope,
Okay,
shouldn't, because it should be, it's in, since it's in the same folder, I don't need the path information.
okay.
So that should be enough for me to be able to find everything. qbdata.txt. Make sure that I'm actually in my right folder. If everybody else is working, if I'm the only one not working, we'll just put you guys on.
Mine
Yours isn't working either, darn.
Oh, of course, Logan.
Logan's is working.
All right, Logan, what'd you do?
I think I did different is I dragged the file into my Explorer workspace.
You're not picking up what you're putting up. Yeah, okay, good.
Say that again.
Drag your text file folder from the folder into your Explorer workspace on Visual Studio. Yeah, down there. Down right there, yeah. Should copy it. You move it properly. Try moving it again.
Oh, put.
Oh,
okay.
Open that Explorer again,
It's just not, let's see.
Okay,
Whoa.
I think I
and
understand.
then drag the folder into there. I don't know if it needs a reference or something. But
It's all right there.
that's not the. It's not in your workspace though.
It's not in your piece.
Okay.
Put it in your.
So I need to open that folder is what you're saying.
But it's not.
Okay, so he's saying that I need to open that folder in Visual Studio Code.
It doesn't do anything. I mean,
That's
I don't get an
alright.
error, but I get the same thing. Is that what we're wanting?
Yeah, mine works.
Yeah, that makes
No,
it work.
No,
Does that make it work?
No. I like. I'm
Did
sorry.
yours yell at you?
Okay, so if you're going, what? This problem is because of Visual Studio Code. Just like with our glitch in image, I told a few people to go back to idle, because idle has all, even though it's kind of lame, it can handle all of the capabilities of Python. When we go to something like Visual Studio.code, they're saying, sure, you can run Python in our environment, but we can run into some problems like this. So if you choose File and then choose Open Folder, and open your new folder that you created for our text file, and then open your Python program from within that folder, it should let you run it without running into trouble. Does that make sense? So you're telling Visual Studio Code, I want you to look at this whole folder, everything that's in it. But if we went to idle, if you went to idle, you wouldn't have to worry. So we could do that same thing in idle. Okay, has everybody got it opening and closing? Yeah. Do we need to fix anybody? He does not look happy.
I don't know.
Well, we can switch to idle if we need to. That might work. Okay. That's where we are. Okay. All of our, everybody's so quiet back there, I can never tell. All right, so now all we're doing is opening that file and closing that file, not doing any work. Let's see what we should do. I'm going to go back to their instructions and click on this to say it's completed. And they say, well, you would like to iterate over lines in a file. Remember, iterate is one process, one execution of a loop cycle. So we could use a for loop to read all of the lines in our file, saying for each line in my file, I want to do all of these things. So they've got some code here for us. Let's try this. We'll do the same exact thing here in our program. So after we open our file, let's do a for loop.
Is that That's before the closing.
Yes,
Yeah.
before the close. So for a line in our, now we're going to have to say in file ref instead of QB file.
Undo the video.
Here, let me do it. There you go. Okay. So for every line in our file, we would like to get all of the different values, and you use the split command when you were splitting up people's names. This time, we're going to use the split command to split up that student name from all of their test scores. So our values list should end up being an array with the student name as the first entry of the array and all of the values. So if I bring up that presentation, for record 1, our values array, subscript 0 will be the name, subscript 1 or index 1 will be 86, index 2 will be 64, index 3 will be 73, index 4 will be 84. So we get all those different entries in our values array. And we can make sure of that by printing them. So let's print QB space. And then we're going to do our values array item 0 and our values array item 1. That should be their first name and their last name. And then we're going to keep printing out a little bit more. Had a rating of, and notice that the single quotes are just the same as the double quotes. Now, our rating item for our QB data is going to be subscript number or index value 10. So if we run this, we should see an output line now for each quarterback in our file. And for each quarterback in our file, we should see their name and their rating. So let's try that. Got all our output there. So much better than us having to sit and type all that in, right? It could have taken us a while to type all of those entries in.
It's crazy how the further along you get in this course, the like smaller your code can do so
So much more.
I was like,
Uh-huh.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
What's the matter?
Saying values is not applied.
Do you have it in your for loop? Is there a typo here in the first line?
No, because mine's
When are we done?
gonna I will write the date down. Today's the 3rd of December.
Now, notice how this is working. It's taking care of that loop that I showed you in the presentation, or that flow chart loop. This for loop is taking care of the whole thing, right? It's saying, read the next line in the file. If it's not end of file, process that line, and doing all of that kind of work for us. Now, we could do this manually if we wanted to. We could say file ref.input, just like we request input from the console. We could request input from the file, but it would be just a little bit different. But we could do that. Okay, so let's continue on.
If we wanted to be crazy, could we have them listed out per the rating or alphabetically?
Yeah, so we could do all sorts of things like that. Now in the next page here, they show us some of that, how we could modify a little bit. Let's read through what they're wanting us to do here. In addition to the for loop, Python provides 3 methods to read data from the input file. The readLine method reads one line from the file and returns it as a string. The string returned by readLine will contain the new line character, that \n at the end. This method returns the empty string when it reaches the end of the file. The readLines method returns the contents of the entire file as a list of strings, where each item in the list represents one line of the file. It's also possible to read the entire file into a single string with read. So table 2 summarizes all these different methods, and the following session shows them in action. Note that we need to reopen the file before each read so that we can start at the beginning. Each file has a marker that denotes the current read position in the file. Anytime one of the read methods is called, the marker is moved to the character immediately following the last character returned. In the case of readLine, this moves the marker to the first character of the next line in the file. In the case of read or readlines, the marker is moved to the end of the file. So you can think about this the same as you would, let's think about a CD. If you had a CD and you issued basically the command read, that would tell you what song was next. If you issued a command read lines, that would tell you all of the songs that were on the CD. If you issued the command read, that would start playing all of the songs that are on the CD. So you can think about the differences there in how those different commands work in that same way. So how much data do you want? How many songs do you want to know about? Now, if you look at the sample code down here, they have a lot of information and a lot of things where they've typed some information. But what I want to do is scroll down a little bit further to the commands. They show us that we can use the write command to add to a file. We can read to read the entire file, read line to read a line, or read lines to read all of the lines. Let's try some examples here. Here's one. Let's change our program to be like this one. I will do it. Let me get it fixed here.
Are we changing it to a while then?
Yeah, so I want to keep this for loop. I'm going to comment it out. There's our for loop. And we can put some comments on here. So I'll say this is a for loop that processes the file. Now, I want in this example, we're going to create a variable called line. And that is going to be one line from our file. So we're going to set line equal to our file ref. Whoops. I'm looking at the example, not ours. So read the file. Let me do this properly. Read a line in the file. So our line variable is going to contain all of the data from one line of our file. Now that we've got that first line read, we're going to start a while loop. And we're going to say while line. And before we talk about that, I'm going to put in this code. We're going to split it up just like we did before. Split the row into columns or record and fields. Now that we've split it, we can print. So I'm going to copy our print statement because I don't want to type that all over again. And now for this while loop, we have to add one more line of code. We have to say, oh, when you're done printing that one out, go ahead and read the next one, the next line. And again, I have to use our file name, file res. So this while loop handles it, and our output should be exactly the same. If you run it, you should see the exact same output. Where are you at?
Line 12, error wasn't great.
Wait, you named the file. You gotta do read. Yeah. Yeah, you put read line.
Oh,
I hate when it does this.
What's it doing?
right here.
And also it's read line, not read file.
Okay, read what?
It's done.
That's what happened. There you go.
Mine is just
You doing commented out our file. Right?
I did it that way.
Oh,
I think your four,
If you've done, I went down before.
in your form
Yes.
is the first form or a line. I think that also has to be in it. Because
It takes it
yours doesn't.
Oh, yeah, it
line.
does.
Oh,
So move
For my
that up.
glasses, for my parents' car, when they dropped me back off for Thanksgiving, so I left my glasses all the way.
Oh,
Yeah, squinting at everything. Yeah.
Can
Which
you
is why I
drive
wanted
already?
to- yeah, it's not that bad. I'm not blind. It's just like, it's just, I can't drive more than like a half hour without getting a headache. So,
You
it's
live
fine.
pretty far from there?
So it's like, oh, 20 minutes away, but I'm too lazy, so my mom just bring me out Thursday when she's in town. So
Oh, no.
I'm not gonna drive out there.
Hey, sometimes it's time is you're doing something else that's not.
Exactly.
That's kind of.
Okay, is it working for everybody? Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? Because it's very similar. Okay, let's go on.
Sometimes I don't even drive 5 minutes from the house.
No, I mean like with a.
I completely lost my entire sentence structure there and I gave up.
So we'd like to create an output file here with all of our quarterbacks, and we just want to grab their names. So let's see if we could do that. Right now, we've got all of this great while stuff that we're working on, and everything looks good. So I think I'll leave it like that, but I want to, I want to change my print. So come with me here. And instead of saying to print all of that, let's create a variable called data line. And we're going to set it equal to our first name, which is our values array index 0. Oh, wait, they want it last name, comma, first name. So we want index value 1 first, plus a comma, plus values 0. And then in our print, let's just print out our data line so we can make sure it looks right. I didn't want a Y there, I want a comma. I was like, I don't know how I got a Y there. You just put it in there anyways. You're so good. I'm sorry. I think we should have it. I think we should have a space after that.
I just blindly was so wild.
You're so nice. Okay, I'm gonna try to run it. And all we should see now is our output of our data lines, just that last name, comma, first name.
Oh no.
No. Yes.
No.
Oh, there they are. I have to go down because I have leftover stuff. So I'm gonna click this little trash can and run it again, make sure I only get the output I want. That looks right. Okay. So if you've got the output you want here from our data line, let's write that to a file instead of writing it to the console. We need to send this off to somebody. They're going to give all these guys big awards. We want to make sure that their names are spelt right. So we're going to send them this data file of first names and last names. So first of all, we need to open another file for our output. So I have my file ref here. Let's create an out file. Now our output file is still going to be opened, and we're going to call it qbnames.txt because it's just going to have the names in them. And we're going to open it with an access mode of W for write, which means we're going to update this file.
What is the on mean again?
We're going to read it. Okay, so we're going to update our file. Now, we've opened our file, we've opened it for output. So instead of printing our data line, we should be able to put that data line into our out file. So instead of print, I'm going to say out file dot write. Now, the only other thing I need to do is make sure I close that output file. So I should be ready to run this now. Right now, I'm going to bring up File Explorer and look at my folder. And in my text file folder, the only things I have are my qbdata.txt and my Python program. So after I run this, I should have a new file. I should have my qbnames.txt file here also. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Now, when it runs, we might not see any output, but if we look at our File Explorer, we should see our qbnames text file. If we open it, everybody's name's in there, but why are they all on one line? Are yours all on one line? Uh-huh. Do you see it?
Yeah, yeah.
In mine, it's all gone.
It's all gone? There's nothing there? We're gonna have to fix it. Okay, well, first let's fix to make sure there's a name on each line. What we have to do there is when we write out our data line, we have to add a \n. We could do a plus here to add it, or we could do the comma. But either one will work. We just have to say, go to a new line after you've written out this name. Now let's run it and see what our output file looks like.
No, mine just didn't like what I did.
Mine's all empty too. Has anybody got stuff?
I don't know if the comma new line works. I think do plus. I did plus and it worked.
Did you do plus and it worked? Well, let's do plus
yeah,
instead.
It's trying to do the comma as an argument.
Okay.
Right.
So we need to do a plus instead. That makes more sense. So we're trying to write it. And we want it to go on a new line.
But I did not.
Did that work?
It'll come back once you press the plus.
No,
There it is.
It just completely wiped the file.
Yep, so did mine. It came back
Mhm.
when I put a plus instead of a comma.
Mhm.
Are you getting a file?
This. Because I have that.
Okay, so now you should have your beautiful output file.
Your QB name.
Is it working for everybody? Good job, good job. That's a hard one to find. That's a common thing. We all do that.
How would you,
Do it.
how do you swap index values up to things in a list?
You would have to create a temporary variable to save one of them.
There's no like dot, but it's swapped.
I don't think so.
Bro,
could
I was
look.
like trying to think of like how you do it sort of rearranging alphabetical order and actually want to find out.
You would have to do it yourself. Be messy. But let's look, let's think about it.
So if you had a file reference itself as opening itself, would it immediately wipe itself? Okay.
Yeah, so anytime you do something like that illegally to a file, you're usually just gonna end up with an empty file. Cool. Not know what to
So
do
it
with
wipes
it.
itself, it doesn't do anything extra.
Right.
Because it did open.
It's just like empty, I don't know what you wanted me to do. Now, before we move on, this is a really interesting concept here. I'm gonna give you guys some time to work. The with command. You know, every time we've used these files, we've had to open and close them. Let me show you something. What'll happen if I don't close my file? We would still end up with an empty file, or someone else would not be able to read it. So what we can do as lazy programmers is we can use the with keyword, and we can say with file ref, do all of these things. And if we do that, then Python will automatically open that file for us, let us use it, and then close it for us when we're done with our with command. So here's an example. They're saying with mydata.txt opening as MD. So it's kind of backwards a little bit. Print my data. For each line in my data, print the line. And then this print statement is outside of the with clause, so it would cancel because the file would get closed at that point. So with is going to close everything. And that's it. Now you know everything about working with files. Actually, you don't. There's some exercises here. You know a very small amount about working with files. You know that it's possible. You know that it's possible and that you can do it and that you're going to learn a lot more about it when you're working with other languages. But realize, just like everything else, the CIS field has gone away from text files, right? Just like you guys don't like having VHS tapes. You don't like having DVDs because you can have everything electronic. Why would I have a DVD if I could stream this movie? The same is true about files. Why would I have a text file if I could save it in a database? So that's where your end result will be, is you're trying to get to data to the database. And from a database, text files are just kind of a step along the way, kind of like working with the console is a step along the way.
Isn't our program the while line? Is that just saying while it's returning something?
While there's data in our file, while there is another row. Yeah, at the end of the runestone step, there's a few exercises. They have answers and discussions. So if it's something that you'd like to work a little bit more with, and since you don't have any assignments, you can definitely experiment with those a little bit more and let me know if you run into any questions. Speaking of assignments, what are you supposed to be doing if you don't have any? Well, your final options are finally posted. Finally. So I try to drive you crazy. So I'm going to go to the hands-on final. And you have 3 choices. And of course, I would probably give you other choices if you wanted to present them to me. No matter what you choose, your hands-on final is just extra credit. Okay, so that means that you don't have to do your hands-on final. You should, but you don't have to. The reason it's this way is because our practice, all of our tests, our test questions that come from that question bank, I know are kind of flaky. And throughout the semester, they've been kind of hard on you guys, and sometimes they're ridiculous. So your final is still coming from that question bank. So the hands-on is all extra credit. So if you get a 75 on the final and you submit one of these options, it gives you 25 extra credit points. That would give you 100 on your final, okay? So this score is totally extra credit, but it also is fun and kind of gives you an option to get some extra points on top of those others. Option 1 is Turtle. If you want to use the Turtle graphics to make a nice graphical design, you can. Remember, if you go out online and you find some Turtle graphics that are canned, I've seen them, don't use those. Need to make your own, but if you make your own Turtle graphic, that could give you some points. Now, the Turtle graphic is 10 to 20 points, depending on how complex it is and how well written it is. I've seen some people do Turtle graphics that were very complex, but they were really poorly written, right? Like maybe they decided that they were going to do a Turtle program to write out their name. That would be a good thing you could do for extra credit. But they have the letter J in their name 3 times, and instead of creating a function to print out the letter J, they just repeat that code every time. Well, that's going to get them less points than if they would have created that J function, right? Because then that would be more points. So that's the kind of things that I'm looking for as far as complexity. Now, option 2 or 3 will give you 25 points if they're working. Option 2 is a golf game. This is a lot like the war game that we worked on together last time and you guys worked on your own. There are some differences though. To get all of the points for this, the score for each hole must be retained in an array with the player's name. And then the array must be used to print everything out at the end. Now, if you do it the same as the war game where there's no array, that's fine, you'll get points. You just won't get the maximum, okay? And then option 3 is kind of a quest type thing where you're gonna allow 2 players to choose strength items. The strength items, like 6 or 8 of them, are saved in an array, and you always display those items and allow the players to choose one of those items. And then after they've each chosen, you would display the items chosen by each player. So in that case, we're just trying to create an array again for each player with the items they select. So notice option 2 and 3, to get your maximum points, you need to have a little bit of array handling in them. If you don't have the array handling, that's okay. You're still going to get points and it's all extra credit. So remember, you don't want to just be like, I can't do that exactly perfect. I'm not going to try it. You want to do what you can do to get some points. Okay? So it's all extra credit. And then the other part is your written final is from all of those canned question banks. So if you look at week 16 practice unit practice tests, that's just a link to all of our different practice exams. So those are the 3 unit exams we've had and the question banks for those 3 unit exams. So there won't be any new questions, nothing that's not in the question banks you have already seen. Questions about the questions?
You have a question with the extra credit thing. Can we submit 2 different, like?
Nope,
if we do
just
not-
one.
Oh.
Just one. Don't get greedy.
I don't even have to take 2, and I got 75 points.
Exactly. Yeah. Just one. Yeah, I've seen people do it before. I'm like, nope, get there nowhere. But if you think of something else that you would like to do as a final, let me know. And if it seems like it hits all of the complexity marks that I'm looking for, then I'll let you do that because I want you to have an opportunity to experiment and work with things. Now, next class will be a little bit the same. We could talk about object-oriented programming so that you have a taste, a short introduction to it before you move on into the other classes. We won't have a whole lot of things for you to do with it.
Since it's extra credit, are we allowed to ask tutors for help or you for help with it? Or is
For
it
your final,
for the extra credit hands-on?
you should do it yourself. Really good question.
I was just asking just
Yeah.
for future reference. I didn't want.
If we're like really stuck on something, can we ask for like hints or something?
Not from anybody but me.
Okay.
Nobody but me. Yeah. So I wouldn't definitely don't go over to the tutoring
Right.
lab to ask them. We want them to remember, I don't know. Sometimes they're like, sure, I can help you. They're always so helpful. Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay, so do come next time. We'll look at object-oriented programming in a nutshell. Get it out of